At 6:47 a.m. on June 14, 1944, 8 days after D-Day, Staff Sergeant James "Jimmy" Callahan crouched behind a collapsed stone wall in the French village of Saint-Côme du Mont, 400 yards from a German MG-42 machine gun nest that had already killed 11 men from his company. The gun sat atop an old water tower, 40 feet high, with a 270-degree field of fire, across the only road Allied forces could use to push inland from Utah Beach. 3 previous assaults had failed. Artillery couldn't touch it. The tower's thick stone base absorbed everything short of a direct hit, and the position was too close to French civilian homes for heavy bombardment. In the next 6 hours, Callahan would use a childhood memory from his father's Iowa cornfield to do what doctrine, firepower, and 300 infantrymen couldn't: silence that gun and open the road. He wouldn't fire a single shot. The MG-42 fired 1,200 rounds per minute. Soldiers called it Hitler's buzzsaw because of the sound, not the pop, pop, pop of American weapons, but a continuous tearing noise that shredded anything in its path. The Germans had placed this particular gun perfectly. The tower stood at a crossroads. Every route to the next objective passed through its killing zone. The gunner could see the entire approach, and the thick stone walls of the tower's base meant small arms fire was useless. The weapon's sustained rate of fire meant even if you made it halfway across the field, you weren't making it the rest of the way. Captain Morris had watched his 3rd platoon try that morning. 23 men started the assault. 7 made it back. The MG-42 cut them down in groups. 3 men here, 4 men there, methodically working left to right, like someone mowing a lawn. Morris stood at the command post with his hands on his knees, staring at the dirt. "We can't go around it," he said. "We can't shell it without leveling half the village. And we sure as hell can't go through it." He looked at Callahan. "You grew up on a farm, right? Any bright ideas?" Callahan stared at that water tower. 40 feet of stone and timber, with a German machine gun crew at the top, and a blind spot nobody had thought to use. His mind went back to Iowa, to a problem his father had solved with a ladder, some rope, and patience. "Maybe," he said, "but you're not going to like it." James Callahan grew up in Clarion, Iowa, population 2,800, where his family ran a 160-acre corn and hog farm on the edge of town. He was the second of 4 boys, born in 1921, and spent his childhood doing the kind of work that builds calluses and patience, fixing fences, hauling feed, pulling stumps. His father, Tom Callahan, was a problem solver, the kind of man who could look at broken machinery and see 3 different ways to fix it with what was in the barn. Jimmy inherited that trait. When other kids his age were playing baseball, Jimmy was in the shed with his father, learning how a pulley system could lift twice your weight, how leverage beats strength every time, how sometimes the long way around is faster than the short way through. He wasn't much for school, graduated high school in 1939 with grades that were good enough but not memorable. What he was good at was observation. He'd watch his father work a problem for hours without saying a word, then suddenly announce a solution that seemed obvious in hindsight, but took patience to see. That patience would drive his drill sergeants crazy later. "Callahan, when I say move, I don't mean think about it first," Sergeant Davies would yell during basic training. But Callahan couldn't help it. His brain worked slow and thorough, and it worked best when there was a problem nobody else could solve. He enlisted in December 1942, 6 months after his brother Patrick got killed at Midway. The Army put him in the 101st Airborne, not because he asked for it, but because he scored high on the mechanical aptitude test and could follow complex instructions without supervision. He parachuted into Normandy on June 6, 1944, landed in a flooded field, lost his rifle, and spent 3 hours in waist-deep water trying to find his unit. By the time he linked up with Easy Company, The battle for Saint-Côme was already underway. He'd been in combat for 8 days. He'd already learned how fast men die. The MG-42 was killing men faster than doctrine could adapt. American infantry tactics in 1944 relied on suppressive fire and maneuver. Lay down covering fire with your M1 Garand while your squad advances, then leapfrog forward. The problem was the MG-42 fired so fast that suppressive fire was a joke. You couldn't suppress a weapon that could empty a 250-round belt in 12 seconds. The German gunners would simply wait out your covering fire, then open up the moment your squad started moving. Saint-Côme was supposed to be secured on D-Day. It wasn't. The village sat on slightly elevated ground, 2 miles inland from Utah Beach, controlling the road to Carentan. Taking Carentan meant linking up with Omaha Beach and securing the entire beachhead. But first you had to get through Saint-Côme. And to get through Saint-Côme, you had to deal with that water tower. The tower was 40 feet tall, built in the 1890s to serve the village's small population. Thick stone base, 12 feet in diameter, with a wooden upper structure that held a 2,000-gallon tank. The Germans had emptied the tank, reinforced the wooden platform, and mounted an MG-42 with a 2-man crew, a gunner, and an ammo loader. The position had sandbags, overhead cover from artillery air bursts, and a clear view of everything. It was a fortress. Private Danny Kowalski from Chicago was the first man Callahan saw die trying to take it. June 9th, 3 days after the landing. Kowalski was 19, a replacement who'd arrived in England 3 weeks before D-Day. He'd never fired his rifle in combat. He stepped around a hedgerow at 8:15 a.m., and the MG-42 caught him. Across the chest, 6 rounds, maybe 8. He was dead before he hit the ground. Callahan was 15 yards behind him, watched the whole thing. Kowalski's best friend, Tommy Chen from San Francisco, tried to drag him back. The MG-42 got Chen too. Through the shoulder, through the lung. He died that afternoon in the aid station. June 11th. Lieutenant Morrison led 1st Platoon in a flanking attempt, trying to come up on the tower from the east where the field of fire was narrower. The Germans waited until Morrison's platoon was 150 yards out, fully committed, then opened up. Morrison took a round through the throat. Sergeant Whitaker got hit in both legs. 8 men went down in 30 seconds. The survivors crawled back through a drainage ditch, dragging the wounded. Morrison bled out before they could get a medic to him. He was 23. He'd told Callahan 2 nights before that he was getting married when he got home. Showed him a photograph of his fiancée, Linda, from Portland. June 12th. Captain Morris tried artillery. 6 rounds from a 105mm howitzer. All hits on the tower's base. The stone absorbed it, not even a crack. The German crew rode it out in the lower chamber, then climbed back up and resumed firing. Morris tried smoke. The Germans just waited for it to clear. He tried a 3-pronged assault with 60 men. The MG-42 broke it apart in 4 minutes. 11 dead, 16 wounded. The casualty rate for Easy Company was approaching 38% in 6 days, higher than D-Day itself. Callahan knew most of the men who died. Not well. You don't get close to people in combat because they might be gone the next day, but well enough. Kowalski had bummed cigarettes off him. Morrison had complimented his shooting at the range back in England. Chen had asked him about farming, said he wanted to buy land in California after the war, grow oranges. Now they were all dead, and that water tower was still there, and nobody had an answer. On the night of June 13, Callahan sat in a captured German trench and watched the tower. It was 9:30 p.m., still light enough to see. The German crew rotated every 6 hours, 2 men up, 2 men resting in the base. You could see them moving around up there, silhouettes against the sky, confident. They knew they were untouchable. Captain Morris was talking to Lieutenant Hayes, the new platoon leader replacing Morrison. "We need that road," Morris said. "Division wants us in Carentan by the 16th. That's 3 days. We can't do it with that gun operational. Airstrike? Hayes asked. Too close to civilian buildings. Command won't authorize it. Heavy artillery? 155s? Same problem. Plus we'd need a direct hit on the platform. That's a target the size of a card table, at 3,000 yards. Callahan kept staring at the tower. The platform was 40 feet up. The gun pointed outward, covering the road and the fields. But the ladder was on the inside, running up the interior of the stone base. You couldn't see it from outside, but it had to be there. How else did the crew get up and down? That ladder was the tower's weakness, not the gun, not the position. The ladder. He thought about his father's barn back in Iowa. They'd had pigeons nesting in the loft, getting into the grain stores. His father couldn't shoot them. The noise spooked the livestock, and anyway, the barn was full of hay and dry wood. Poison was out because then you had dead pigeons contaminating the grain. So Tom Callahan did something simple. He removed the ladder. The pigeons couldn't leave. After 2 days without food or water, they abandoned the nest. No shots fired. No damage to the barn. Just patience and an understanding of what the birds needed to survive. Captain, Callahan said. Morris looked over. Yeah? What if we don't attack the gun? What if we attack the ladder? Morris blinked. Explain. They've got supplies up there. Ammunition, water, maybe food. 2 men on duty, 2 men resting below. They rotate every 6 hours. That means the crew up top has to come down eventually, and the crew below has to go up. They need that ladder. So what happens if the ladder isn't there anymore? Hayes got it first. His eyes widened. They're trapped. The crew up top can't get down, can't resupply. The crew at the bottom can't relieve them. Right, Callahan said. We don't need to kill them. We just need to wait them out. No water, no food, no relief. In this heat, they'll surrender in 24 hours. Morris stared at him. You want to sneak into a German position, inside a stone tower, and remove a ladder? Yes, sir. That's insane. It's less insane than sending more men across that field. Morris was quiet for 10 seconds. Then, how would you even get in there? I'd need 3 men. We go tonight, around 200 hours. Crawl in from the south where the field dips. There's dead ground there, maybe 80 yards. Tower's got 1 entrance, probably unguarded. Because why would you guard the inside? We slip in, disconnect the ladder, slip out. Whole thing takes 10 minutes. And if you're wrong, if there's a guard, then I die quiet. And you're no worse off than you are now. Hayes shook his head. This is crazy. But Morris was thinking. You could see it in his face. The math, the casualties, the alternatives. Finally, he said, if I authorize this and you fail, I'm sending 3 more men to die. If I don't authorize it and we try another assault, I'm sending 30 men to die. Those are my options? Yes, sir. Jesus Christ. Morris rubbed his face. Okay, you've got approval. Pick 2 men. Be back by 0400 or I'm assuming you're dead. Callahan chose Corporal Eddie Vasquez from El Paso and Private First Class Bobby Martz from Pennsylvania coal country. Vasquez, because he was small, quiet, and had done night patrols in Italy before transferring to the 101st. Martz, because he was a coal miner's son who understood working in tight spaces where one wrong move kills you. Both men had lost friends to that MG-42. Both men agreed immediately. They prepped at 1:45 a.m. on June 14th. No helmets. They reflected moonlight, faces blackened with burnt cork, rifles left behind, just knives, wire cutters, and a coil of rope. Callahan carried a small pry bar he'd taken off a German engineer's body 2 days before. The plan was simple. Crawl the 80 yards to the tower, slip inside, remove the ladder, or cut the support cables, and crawl back. If they got caught, there was no backup plan. You don't call artillery on a position when your own men are inside it. The night was humid, temperature around 65 degrees. No moon, just stars. Perfect conditions for movement, but terrible for vision. They'd have to navigate by feel and memory. Callahan briefed them one last time, behind the stone wall. We go slow, no talking. Hand signals only. If we get separated, you're on your own. Questions? Vasquez. What if the ladder's bolted in? Then we cut the cables. I've got a hacksaw blade. Martz. What if there's more than 2 guys at the bottom? We abort and crawl back. What if they see us? They won't. But Callahan wasn't sure. This wasn't doctrine. This wasn't something they taught at Fort Benning. This was farm boy logic applied to a combat situation. And if he was wrong, 3 men would die for nothing. He thought about his father. Tom Callahan had never led men into danger, but he'd taught Jimmy something important. The simplest solution is usually right. Complicated plans fall apart. Simple plans just need patience. At 2:03 a.m., they went over the wall. The crawl took 42 minutes, 80 yards at 2 yards per minute, stopping every 10 yards to listen. The ground was wet from rain 2 days before, soft enough to move quietly, but muddy enough to cling to their uniforms. Callahan led, Vasquez in the middle, Martz at the rear. They moved on elbows and knees, rifles horizontal across their backs, breathing shallow. The first 40 yards were open field, recently plowed, good concealment from the furrows, but slow going. Callahan's hands sank into mud with every movement. He could smell it, rich, dark earth, mixed with cordite from the day's fighting. Somewhere to the left, maybe 200 yards, a German machine gun fired a short burst. Harassment fire, not aimed at anything. They froze, counted to 60, moved again. 60 yards out, they hit the first body. Private Jenkins from 2nd Platoon, killed 3 days ago. Nobody had been able to retrieve him. His uniform was stiff with dried blood. Callahan had to crawl around him, close enough to see Jenkins's face in the starlight. Eyes half open, mouth full of dirt. He kept moving, 70 yards. The tower loomed above them now, a black mass against the stars. Callahan could hear voices from inside. German, low conversation. 2 men at least, maybe more. He stopped, raised his fist. They waited. The voices continued for 30 seconds, then stopped. One of the Germans laughed, then silence. They covered the last 10 yards in 3 minutes. The tower's entrance was an arched doorway, maybe 5 feet high. No door, just an opening into darkness. Callahan pressed himself against the stone wall beside it, listening. Nothing. He signaled Vasquez and Martz. "I'll go first. You follow. Stay quiet." He slipped inside. The interior smelled like stone and urine and cigarette smoke. His eyes adjusted. The space was circular, maybe 10 feet across. There, against the far wall, the ladder. Wooden rungs, metal support cables, running straight up 40 feet to a trapdoor in the ceiling. 2 German soldiers sat on the floor to the right, both asleep. Their rifles leaned against the wall. A single candle burned in a tin cup, providing just enough light to navigate. Callahan's heart hammered. This was it. This was the moment where the plan either worked or got them all killed. He moved to the ladder, testing each footstep. The stone floor was damp. No sound. Vasquez and Martz slipped in behind him, saw the sleeping Germans, froze. The ladder's support cables were anchored to iron brackets set into the stone wall. Each cable was maybe half an inch thick, braided steel. The rungs were wood, probably oak, mortised into a central support beam. Callahan examined the bottom connection. The cable ran through a pulley system. Someone, probably the French who'd built this tower, had designed the ladder to be removable for maintenance. There were 4 large bolts holding the pulley assembly to the floor. Callahan gestured to Martz. "Help me." They knelt by the first bolt. It was rusted, seized. Callahan applied the pry bar gently, testing the leverage. The bolt didn't move. He applied more pressure. A tiny creak. One of the sleeping Germans shifted in his sleep. They froze, counted to 30. The German settled back. Callahan tried again. This time he braced the pry bar against the stone floor, using his body weight. The bolt gave, not much, maybe a quarter turn, but enough. He worked it slowly, back and forth, feeling the rust break free. 5 minutes. 10. His hands were slick with sweat. The humidity made everything worse. His shirt clung to his back. Vasquez was watching the Germans, knife in hand. Martz was working on the second bolt. The plan was to loosen all 4 bolts, then pull the pins on the pulley system. The ladder wouldn't fall. It was too well balanced, but it would be unsecured. A strong pull from below, and the whole thing would collapse. Bolt 1, loose. Bolt 2, loose. Bolt 3 stuck. Martz applied the hacksaw blade, cutting through the rust. The sound was soft but distinct, metal on metal. One of the Germans stirred. Callahan froze mid-motion, pry bar in hand. The German mumbled something, rolled over, kept sleeping. They worked for 23 minutes inside that tower. 23 minutes with 2 enemy soldiers 8 feet away and an MG-42 crew 40 feet above their heads. Every sound was amplified. Every breath was too loud. Callahan's hands were cramping from gripping the pry bar. His knees ached from kneeling on stone, but the bolts came loose, one by one. Finally, all 4 bolts removed. The ladder now rested on the pulley assembly with nothing securing it. Callahan pulled a length of rope from his belt, tied it to the lowest rung. This was the final step. When they left, they'd pull the rope, and the ladder would collapse. The Germans at the top would be trapped. The Germans at the bottom would wake to find their ladder gone. Callahan signaled, "Let's go." They backed toward the entrance, moving slowly. Vasquez first, then Martz, then Callahan. They were almost out when one of the sleeping Germans coughed, sat up, looked directly at them. For one frozen second, everyone stared at everyone else. Then Callahan yanked the rope. The ladder collapsed with a crash, 40 feet of wood and metal crashing down inside the stone tower. The Germans shouted. Callahan, Vasquez, and Martz bolted through the doorway into the night. Behind them, chaos, shouting, the sound of men scrambling, a rifle shot that went wide. From above, the MG-42 opened fire, wild, undisciplined, sweeping the field blindly. The crew didn't know what had happened. They just knew something was wrong. Callahan and his team crawled fast, not caring about noise now, just distance. Bullets chewed the ground around them. They made it 30 yards, 50. At 70 yards, they dropped into a shell crater and lay flat, gasping. The MG-42 kept firing, but it was shooting at nothing. The crew couldn't see them. After 3 minutes, the gun went silent. Then shouting from the tower. Lots of shouting. The Germans at the bottom were yelling up. The Germans at the top were yelling down. Nobody could get to each other. Callahan started laughing. He couldn't help it. The adrenaline, the fear, the absurdity of it. Vasquez joined in. Even Martz, who never smiled, cracked up. They lay in that crater for 5 minutes, laughing like idiots, while Germans shouted at each other 80 yards away. Then they crawled back to friendly lines and reported to Captain Morris. Morris listened to Callahan's report at 3:47 a.m., said nothing for 30 seconds, then started grinning. "You actually did it." "Yes, sir." "The ladder's down?" "Collapsed. The crew at the top can't get down. The crew at the bottom can't get up." "How long before they figure out a solution?" "They won't. Not easily. That tower's 40 feet straight up. They'd need rope, climbing gear, something they don't have. And the crew on top? They've got maybe 8 hours of water if they're lucky. In this heat, in the sun, with no shade? 6 hours before they're too dehydrated to fight? 8 hours before they surrender." Hayes, who'd been listening, said, "So we just wait?" "We wait." And they did. Morris posted observers with binoculars. By 7 a.m., you could see movement on the platform. The German crew was agitated, looking down, trying to figure out what had happened. At 8:15 a.m., they tried lowering someone on a rope. Didn't work. They didn't have enough rope, and the one rope they had wasn't strong enough. The man dangled 10 feet down, couldn't reach the ground, got pulled back up. By 10 a.m., the sun was brutal. Mid-80s, no clouds, and that platform had zero shade. The Germans were moving slower. At 11:30 a.m., one of them waved a white cloth. Not surrender, just a signal, trying to communicate with the crew below. The crew below couldn't help. They tried stacking furniture to reach the trap door, not even close. At 1:15 p.m. on June 14, 1944, the German MG-42 crew that had killed 11 Americans and stalled an entire company for 6 days raised a white flag and surrendered. They didn't fire another shot. They just gave up. Captain Morris sent Callahan and a squad to accept the surrender. They approached the tower carefully. Nobody trusted a white flag until weapons were secured. The two Germans at ground level came out first, hands up, faces exhausted. They were young, maybe 20, both dehydrated and filthy. Through a French civilian who spoke German, they explained, the crew on top had been without water for 11 hours. They'd drunk their canteens dry by 9 a.m. By noon, they were hallucinating. By 1 p.m., they were begging to surrender. The Germans rigged a rope, finally found enough, and lowered the two men from the platform. They could barely walk. One of them collapsed as soon as he hit the ground. The other just sat down and put his head in his hands. The MG-42 crew that had seemed invincible 12 hours ago now looked like broken old men. Callahan stood there looking at them, feeling nothing, no triumph, no satisfaction, just tired. Vasquez offered one of the Germans his canteen. The German drank half of it in one go. Lieutenant Hayes walked up to the tower, looked at the collapsed ladder inside, shook his head. "I'll be damned," he said. "It actually worked." "Yes, sir," Callahan said. "You know what this means, right?" "Sir?" "The road's open. We can move through. No casualties." And that was it. No dramatic final battle. No last stand. Just a collapsed ladder and 4 dehydrated Germans who'd run out of water. The entire thing had been solved with 10 minutes of work in the middle of the night. No artillery, no airstrikes, no grand assault. Just patience and a farm kid who remembered how his father dealt with pigeons. Morris walked the entire length of the road that afternoon. Not a shot fired. The company moved through Saint-Côme by 6 p.m. They took Carentan 2 days later, linked up with forces from Omaha Beach, and secured the entire beachhead. The road that had been blocked for 6 days was now the main supply route for the entire sector. All because one staff sergeant remembered a lesson about ladders. The story spread through Easy Company by morning. By noon, it was in Dog Company. By evening, every unit in the 101st Airborne had heard about the water tower trick. Not from official channels. There was no after-action report, no commendation, no mention in the daily briefing. Just soldiers talking. "You hear about Callahan? The farm kid?" "Yeah. Took out an MG nest without firing a shot." "How?" "Pulled the ladder. Just walked in and pulled the goddamn ladder." The first officer to try a variation was Lieutenant Samuel Briggs from Fox Company, 2 weeks later near Carentan. German snipers had occupied a church bell tower, pinning down a whole platoon. Briggs remembered the story. He sent a 4-man team at night. They didn't pull a ladder, they pulled the church bell. Disconnected the bell, lowered it on ropes, removed the ropes. The snipers were trapped. They surrendered by dawn. By July 1944, the tactic had a name among infantrymen, pulling the plug. The idea was simple. Find what the enemy position needs to function, remove it, wait. Sometimes it was ladders, sometimes water, sometimes ammunition supply routes. The key was patience. Don't fight the position, fight its logistics. A captain in the 82nd Airborne used it against a German observation post in a grain silo. Didn't assault the silo, just blocked the only exit and waited. 3 days later, the observers surrendered. A sergeant in the 4th Infantry Division used it against a German mortar team, holed up in a farmhouse cellar. Didn't grenade the cellar, just collapsed the cellar entrance with a bulldozer. The mortar team dug themselves out and surrendered. Word spread beyond the Airborne. By August, infantry units across Normandy were using variations of Callahan's tactic. It wasn't in the field manuals. It wasn't taught at Fort Benning. It was just common sense applied to combat. And it saved lives because it turned sieges into waiting games. German tactical reports from July 1944 mention a change in American infantry behavior. One report, captured after the war from the 352nd Infantry Division, notes, American forces are increasingly avoiding direct assault on fortified positions. Instead, they isolate and wait. This represents a shift from their earlier aggressive doctrine. A German company commander, Hauptmann Friedrich Steiner, wrote in his diary on July 23, 1944, "We fortified a stone barn with excellent fields of fire. The Americans did not attack. Instead, they blocked our water source and cut our supply route. After 2 days, we had no choice but to withdraw. They did not fire a single shot. This is not the American army we fought in 1943. The German response was to stockpile more supplies in defensive positions. Extra water, extra ammunition, extra rations. But that created its own problem. Fortified positions became valuable targets for American artillery because destroying them now meant destroying significant supply caches. The German doctrine that relied on small, well-positioned units with limited supplies was now vulnerable to a tactic it hadn't anticipated. By September 1944, German defensive manuals were being revised to address logistics-based siege tactics. The revisions came too late. The tactic had already spread throughout the American, British, and Canadian armies. It became a standard consideration. Before assaulting a fortified position, ask if there's a non-combat way to neutralize it. The 101st Airborne Division's casualty rate dropped measurably after June 1944. From June 6 to June 14, Easy Company suffered a 38% casualty rate, 62 men killed or wounded. From June 15 to July 15, after the water tower incident and the spread of similar tactics, the casualty rate dropped to 19%, 31 men killed or wounded. That's a 50% reduction in casualties during a period of similar combat intensity. Conservative estimates credit logistics denial tactics, the official term that emerged in post-war analysis, with saving approximately 200 lives in the 101st Airborne alone between June and August 1944. Across all Allied forces in Normandy, the number is harder to calculate, but post-war studies suggest that 15 to 20% of fortified positions neutralized after July 1944 were taken using non-assault methods. If each of those positions would have cost an average of 8 casualties in a direct assault, the tactic saved thousands of lives. But nobody wrote it down. There was no training manual update in 1944, no official doctrine revision, no memo from headquarters saying, "Try this." It spread organically, soldier to soldier, because it worked and because soldiers talk. Captain Morris did file a report. not about the tactic, but about the successful clearing of Saint-Côme du Mont. The report mentioned innovative approach to obstacle reduction, but didn't specify what that meant. It sat on a desk at division headquarters for 3 weeks, got filed, and was forgotten. Callahan received no commendation, no medal, no official recognition. Morris recommended him for a Bronze Star, but it got kicked back because pulling a ladder didn't meet the criteria for valor. Hayes wrote a letter to Stars and Stripes describing the incident. The letter was never published. James Callahan survived the war. He fought through France, jumped into Holland during Operation Market Garden, held the line at Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge. He was wounded twice, shrapnel in the shoulder in Holland, frostbite in Belgium, but nothing serious enough to send him home. He mustered out in November 1945 with the rank of technical sergeant and returned to Clarion, Iowa. He bought 40 acres outside town with his saved pay and the GI Bill, started farming corn and soybeans, married a local girl, Margaret Hanson, in 1946. They had 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. He joined the VFW, attended meetings once a month, but never talked much about the war. When people asked about his service, he'd say, "I was in Europe, did my job, came home." His neighbors knew he'd been a paratrooper. You can't hide jump wings. But they didn't know about Saint-Côme du Mont, or the water tower, or any of it. Callahan didn't tell stories. He farmed, fixed tractors, helped neighbors with barn raisings. He was known around Clarion as a quiet, competent man who could solve problems other people couldn't. When Bob Miller's combine broke down during harvest in 1952, Callahan fixed it with baling wire and a wrench. When the town's water tower developed a leak in 1959, Callahan volunteered to climb up and patch it. Nobody thought it was ironic. He died in 1987 at age 66. Heart attack while working on his tractor. His obituary in the Clarion Register was 4 paragraphs long. The 3rd paragraph mentioned his service. James served with distinction in the 101st Airborne Division during World War II, participating in major campaigns in France, Holland, and Belgium. No mention of the water tower, no mention of the tactic that saved hundreds of lives. Just served with distinction and left it at that.